At 23 years old, Wren Calloway had already learned that the world preferred to forget girls like her. 2 parents in the ground, 11 foster homes, 19 months living out of a 2003 Honda parked behind truck stops, and 24-hour laundromats across Pennsylvania. She owned almost nothing: a duffel bag, a waitress apron, and one carved wooden frame holding the only photograph she had of her mother, a frame she had carried since she was a baby and never in 23 years allowed out of her sight. Then the letter found her at a gas station outside Harrisburg, a certified envelope from a law office in a town she had never heard of. Bramble Hollow. An inheritance from a woman named Iris Calloway, a grandmother Wren did not know existed. 11 acres, a farmhouse, and a small red shed sealed shut with a brass padlock and a key tied with a faded blue ribbon. What Wren did not know yet was that the shed had been waiting for her since the night her father was murdered in February 2003. That her grandmother had spent 23 years quietly assembling the evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful men in Pennsylvania. That the photograph she had carried her entire life held a secret hidden inside its frame, and that the moment she turned that key, she would stop being the girl the world tried to forget and become the one person left who could finally make it remember. The Honda's heater had stopped working sometime in October. Wren Calloway didn't know exactly when. She only noticed it the morning she woke up with frost on the inside of the windshield and her breath hanging in the air like the ghost of someone who used to live in her body. She was parked behind a Sunoco station off Route 81, tucked between a dumpster and a delivery truck that hadn't moved in 3 days. The clock on the dashboard read 4:47 a.m. Her shift at the diner started at 5. She sat up slowly. Her back ached the way it always did now, a deep, tired ache that had taken up residence somewhere behind her ribs and refused to leave. She pulled her hoodie tighter around her shoulders. The fabric had been blue once. Years of washing in gas station sinks and laundromat machines had faded it to the color of weak coffee. In the passenger seat sat the only thing she owned that mattered: a carved wooden picture frame about the size of a paperback book, with a photograph behind the glass. The frame was old. The wood was dark walnut, hand-carved, with small flowers along the edges that someone decades ago had taken the time to do well. Inside the frame was a single image: a woman in her late 20s, standing in the middle of an orchard sunlight, catching in her dark hair, holding a baby against her chest. The baby was Wren. The woman was her mother. Wren had carried that frame through 11 foster homes, through a group facility in Erie when she was 13, through the back seat of every car she'd ever slept in. Other things had been taken from her over the years: clothes, books, a silver bracelet that had been her mother's. But the frame had never left her side. She didn't fully understand why. only that the first time a caseworker had tried to put it in a storage box when she was 6 years old, Wren had screamed until her throat bled, and the woman had finally given it back. She'd never let anyone hold it since. The morning light was beginning to lift behind the gas station roof. Wren ran her fingers through her hair, tied it back with a rubber band she found in the cup holder, and slid out into the cold. The parking lot smelled of diesel and old fryer grease. Her boots crunched on gravel as she walked toward the diner across the street. She was 23 years old. She had been on her own since she aged out of the system at 18. For the first 3 years, she'd really tried to make something stick. A studio apartment in Pittsburgh, a community college class she'd had to drop because the textbooks cost more than her week's rent, a boyfriend who'd seemed kind for a while and then hadn't. By the time she was 21, she had stopped trying to make anything stick. It was easier to keep moving, easier to disappear before anyone realized she had been there at all. Her mother had died when Wren was 11. A hit and run on a back road outside Scranton. The police never found the driver. They said her mother had been heading west into Pennsylvania, though they couldn't figure out why. There had been no family to claim Wren, no grandparents listed on any document, no aunts or uncles. Just a birth certificate with blanks where there should have been names and a social worker who already had too many files on her desk. Her mother's last name had been Rowan. Wren Rowan. That was what every school transcript said, every medical record, every form she had ever filled out for a job. It was not, as she would learn before the end of the week, her real name. She poured coffee that morning for truckers and night shift mechanics. She wiped down counters. She listened to a regular named Pete tell a story she had heard him tell 6 times already about a deer he had hit with his pickup in 1987. She smiled where she was supposed to smile. She refilled cups. At 9:15, she went out behind the kitchen to throw away a bag of garbage, and that was when she saw the man standing next to her car. He was thin, mid-60s, maybe older. He wore a brown corduroy jacket and a wool cap pulled low over silver hair. In his hands, he held a manila envelope. He was not looking at her car. He was looking past it toward the highway, the way someone looks when they are gathering the courage to do something they have been working up to for a long time. Wren froze with the garbage bag still in her hand. The man turned his head. He saw her. His eyes were pale gray and tired in a way she recognized. She had seen those same eyes in the mirror on the worst mornings when she could not remember why she was still trying. "Miss Calloway," he said. The name meant nothing to her. She almost said so. She almost said, "You've got the wrong girl," and walked back inside, and that would have been the end of it. But something in the way he had spoken, the careful softness of it, like he had practiced the words on the drive over, made her stop. "My name is Rowan," she said. The man looked at her a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly, as if he had expected this exact answer. "Yes," he said. "I know." He held out the envelope. She did not take it. The garbage bag dangled from her fingers, growing heavier. The cold morning air pressed in around them. "My name is Sheridan Boggs," the man said. "I'm a private investigator out of Wilkes Barre. I've been looking for you for a very long time. The woman who hired me passed away 3 weeks ago. Before she died, she made me promise to find you and deliver this. So that is what I am doing." His voice was rough but quiet. He held the envelope steady. After a moment, Wren set the garbage bag down on the gravel and reached for it. Her fingers brushed his. His hands were cold. "Who hired you?" she asked. Sheridan Boggs took a step back. He glanced once more at the highway, as if making sure no one had followed him there. Then he looked at her, and for a moment his tired eyes filled with something that might have been pity, or might have been grief, or might have been both. "Your grandmother," he said. "Iris Calloway." The name landed in Wren's chest like a stone dropped into still water. She felt the ripple of it move out through her body. Grandmother. She had no grandmother. She had never had a grandmother. She had been told all her life that there was no one. She opened her mouth to say so, but the man had already turned. He was walking back toward a dark sedan parked at the edge of the lot. He moved like a man whose joints had been failing him for years. "Wait," Wren said. He paused with one hand on the door of his car. "Why now?" she asked. "If she was looking for me, why now? Why not 5 years ago? Why not 10? Sheridan Boggs did not turn around. He looked instead at the gray morning sky, at the empty highway beyond the gas station, at something only he could see. "She found you sooner than this, Miss Calloway," he said. "We found you when you were 9 years old, and again when you were 13, and again when you were 19. Wren's breath stopped. "Then why?" she whispered. "Because every time we found you," Sheridan said, "she made me promise not to bring you home. She said it wasn't safe. She said she would know when the time was right." He finally turned and looked at her. "3 weeks ago, she told me it was time. Then she died the next morning." He got into his car. The engine started. He drove away. Wren stood in the parking lot for a long time. The envelope was heavy in her hands, heavier than paper had any right to be. She did not finish her shift. She went inside, told the manager she was sick, walked back to her car, and sat behind the wheel. The envelope was on her lap. She stared at it. The morning was getting brighter around her, the sun finally breaking over the roof of the gas station. Her breath no longer hung in the air. When she finally opened it, her hands were steady. Inside were 3 documents and a letter. The first document was a deed. The Calloway property, 11 acres, plus farmhouse and outbuildings located in Bramble Hollow, Pennsylvania, transferred in full to Wren Rowan, also known as Wren Calloway, sole surviving heir of Iris Beatrice. Calloway deceased. The second document was a death certificate. Iris Beatrice Calloway, born March 4th, 1939, died September 14th, 2026. Cause of death listed as congestive heart failure. 87 years old. The third document was a small brass key tied to a piece of faded blue ribbon. The letter was a single-page handwritten in blue ink that had bled slightly into the paper. The hand was elegant but uneven, as if the writer had been very tired. "My dearest girl," the letter began. "If you are reading this, I have failed in the only way that matters. I wanted to look you in the eye. I wanted you to know me before you knew the rest. I am sorry. I am so very sorry. Please come to the farm. Everything you have ever needed to know about who you are is waiting in the red shed at the edge of the orchard. Do not open it in front of anyone. Do not show the key to anyone. Trust no one in Bramble Hollow until you have read what I have left for you. I have loved you every day of your life. You were never alone. I promise. I promise." It was signed in a smaller hand, "Your grandmother." Wren sat in the car with the letter on her knees and cried for the first time in 9 years. She drove west the next morning. Bramble Hollow was not on most maps. She had to find it by zooming in on her phone, scrolling through the gray-green sprawl of the Appalachian foothills until she saw the small name written in faint letters along a curving road that followed the Susquehanna River. The drive took 6 hours. She passed through towns where the only signs of life were a single gas station and a feed store, through stretches of forest where the leaves had turned the color of rust across 2 long iron bridges that groaned beneath her tires. By late afternoon, the sky had gone the soft gray of old pewter. The road narrowed, trees pressed in on both sides. Then suddenly, she came around a bend and the land opened up. She saw the orchard first. Rows of apple trees stretched down a gentle slope toward a creek. The leaves were yellowing. The fruit had already been picked. At the top of the slope stood a white farmhouse with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Someone had been there. Someone had kept the fire going. Wren parked at the end of the gravel driveway and sat for a long moment with her hands on the wheel. 23 years of moving. 23 years of motel rooms and gas station bathrooms and the back seat of a car. 23 years of telling herself she was used to it. And now this. A house. A driveway. A chimney with smoke rising from it like an answered prayer. She got out of the car. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves and something else underneath, something sweet, like apples that had fallen and begun to turn. She walked up the porch steps. The boards creaked beneath her. Before she could knock, the door opened. The man standing on the other side was tall and thin, in his 60s, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and gold-rimmed glasses. He wore a charcoal wool sweater over a button-down shirt and dark trousers that had been pressed. He looked, Wren thought, like a man who had not gotten dressed for a workday in some time, but was still in the habit. "Miss Calloway," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "I'm Vance Pritchard. I was your grandmother's attorney for 31 years. Please, come in." She followed him inside. The house smelled of cedar and old books. The floors were wide pine planks worn soft by a century of footsteps. A grandfather clock ticked in the front hall. Photographs hung along the staircase, but Wren did not look at them yet. She did not trust herself to. Vance Pritchard led her into the front parlor. A fire was burning low in a stone hearth. On a small table sat a wooden box, a folded blanket, a pitcher of water with 2 glasses, and a single typed document. "Please," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. "Sit." She sat. He took the chair across from her and folded his hands carefully in his lap. He had long, thin fingers and a gold wedding band that had been worn so smooth it looked almost like skin. "Your grandmother prepared everything in great detail," he said. "I have a number of papers for you to sign. There is also a small amount of cash, $6,000, set aside in an envelope to help you in the immediate term. The house is yours, free and clear. There is no mortgage. The property taxes are paid through the end of next year." He paused. He looked at her carefully. She also left specific instructions regarding a certain outbuilding on the property, a small red shed at the eastern edge of the orchard. "She left that for you to discover on your own," he said. "I was not given access. I was not given the key. I was instructed only to give you this address and this house, and to inform you that the shed is yours, and that you should open it only when you are alone." He held her eyes. "She was very specific about that, Miss Calloway. Only when you are alone." Wren said nothing. She nodded. They went through the paperwork. He showed her where to sign. He explained the property lines, the septic system, the wood stove in the kitchen, the small monthly payment that would come from a trust her grandmother had established. He explained that there was a neighbor named Garrett Holloway who lived in the next house down the road, who had a key to the front door for emergencies, who had been a friend of her grandmother's for many decades. He explained that he himself would be available for any questions she might have, that his office was in town just behind the old Methodist church, and that she could come by any time during business hours. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Miss Calloway," he said, "if you do not mind my saying so, your grandmother was one of the finest women I have ever known, and the loneliest. I hope you will not judge her too harshly for the years she stayed away." He left. She stood in the front parlor with the fire crackling behind her and listened to his car start in the driveway. She listened to it pull away. She listened until the sound of the engine was gone, and there was only the wind in the orchard and the slow ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. She was alone in a house that belonged to her. She did not know what to do with that. She walked through the rooms slowly. The kitchen had a long farmhouse table and a cast-iron stove. The pantry was stocked. Someone had filled it within the last week. Flour, coffee, canned soup, a jar of honey with a handwritten label that said, Callaway Apiary 2025. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. One had clearly belonged to her grandmother. The bed was made with a quilt the color of dried roses. On the nightstand sat a Bible, a pair of reading glasses, a small framed photograph of a young man in a Marine Corps dress uniform. Wren stopped at that photograph. She picked it up carefully. The young man in the picture had a square jaw and serious eyes, and a small scar above his left eyebrow. He was smiling slightly the way people smiled in formal portraits, like they had been told to, but did not quite want to. He looked, she realized, like her. He had her eyes. He had her chin. He had the same small upward turn at the corner of his mouth that her mother had also had. She turned the frame over. Written on the back in the same blue ink as the letter she had been carrying for 2 days were 5 words. Beckett, Camp Lejeune, 1986. Beckett. She set the frame down. She was shaking. She went outside. The light was beginning to fade. She walked across the backyard, past a wooden bench under a maple tree, past a small herb garden gone wild, down a footpath that led through the orchard. The trees were old, their branches twisted overhead like the rafters of a cathedral. The grass was tall between the rows. She walked for several minutes before she saw the shed. It stood by itself at the far edge of the orchard, where the trees thinned out and the land sloped down toward a stand of birch. It was small, maybe 10 feet wide. The paint was a deep barn red weathered, but not peeling, as if someone had repainted it within the last few years. A heavy brass padlock hung from the door. Wren stopped 20 feet away. The wind moved through the orchard behind her. A few late leaves fell. Somewhere out in the trees, a crow called once and then went quiet. She walked the last 20 feet slowly. The padlock was old but well oiled. The brass had been polished. The key around her neck fit the keyhole as if it had been made for it, which she realized it had. She turned the key. The lock opened with a small, definite click. She removed the padlock. She set it on the ground beside her. She put her hand on the door. She did not open it yet. For a long moment, she stood there listening to the wind, feeling the cold metal of the key still warm from where it had rested against her skin. She thought of her mother. She thought of the photograph in the wooden frame. She thought of Sheridan Boggs and his tired gray eyes. She thought of the words in her grandmother's letter.
You were never alone, I promise. I promise. She opened the door.
The smell came first. Cedar, old paper, lavender, and something underneath those things, something warm and human, like a room where someone has been recently. The light from the open door spilled in. Dust motes drifted in the late afternoon sun. The interior of the shed was clean, far cleaner than it had any right to be. The walls were lined with shelves. The shelves held wooden crates and labeled folders and stacks of envelopes tied with string. A workbench stood along one wall with a magnifying glass and a small lamp, and a set of archival gloves laid out neatly. In the center of the room stood a large wooden trunk. It was covered with a piece of white linen cloth. On top of the cloth, set carefully in the middle, was a single envelope with her name written across the front in blue ink. For Wren. She stepped inside. She closed the door behind her. She found a kerosene lantern hanging from a hook by the door. She lit it. The room came alive in warm yellow light. Now she could see the shelves more clearly. Now she could see that every folder was labeled with a date. The earliest dates she could see were from 2003. The most recent were from this past summer. 23 years of folders. 23 years. She walked to the trunk. She lifted the linen cloth. The trunk beneath was old. Dark walnut wood reinforced with black iron at the corners. On the lid, carved deeply into the wood, were two initials. I.C. Iris Calloway. She lifted the envelope with her name on it. Her hands were steady now. She did not know why. She sat down on the floor in front of the trunk, the lantern beside her, and opened the letter. My darling girl, it began. The letter was long. She read it slowly. By the time you read this, you will already have heard a man named Sheridan Boggs say a name to you that you have never heard before. Calloway. Your name is Wren Calloway. Your mother's name was not Delia Rowan. It was Delia Calloway. She was my only daughter. She was the bravest, most stubborn, most beautiful woman who ever lived. And I will go to my grave, begging God to forgive me for the years I lost with her. She changed her name when she ran. She had to. The man who was hunting her would have used any name she kept to find her. I never blamed her. I never resented her. I only missed her every single day until the day she died. And then I missed her worse than that. There are things I need you to know, and they cannot be told to you in one letter. They are in this room. They are in this trunk. They are in the folders on the shelves. They are in places I cannot put in writing even now, because there are still people in this town who would do you harm if they knew what you have come here to find. Your father's name was Beckett Calloway. He was a Marine. He served at Camp Lejeune from 1985 to 1989. He left the Corps and came home to Bramble Hollow and became a journalist. He was the editor of a small newspaper called the Bramble Hollow Sentinel. He was investigating a story when he died. The story was about a chemical company that had been poisoning the drinking water in 3 counties for almost 20 years. and about the men in this state who had been paid very large sums of money to make sure nobody ever found out. Your father died in a car accident in February of 2003. You were 3 months old. He was 38 years old. It was not an accident. I have spent 23 years proving that it was not an accident. I have spent 23 years trying to find the man who ordered it done. I am very close, Ren. I am closer than I have been at any point in my life. The evidence is in this shed. It is in the folders. It is in the trunk. There is more of it in a place I will tell you about when you have read enough to understand. I would have finished this myself. I tried. God knows I tried. But my heart is failing me now, and I have made a decision I hope you will forgive. I am leaving it to you, not because you owe it to me, not because you owe it to your father, but because you are the only person left in the world who carries Calloway blood, and because I believe with my whole soul that you are stronger than I ever was. Read everything. Trust no one in this town until you have. Not Vance Pritchard, not the sheriff, not the neighbors who will come by with casseroles, not even Garrett Holloway, who has been my friend for 50 years and who knows more about this than any other living person. I love Garrett, but I have learned that love does not always mean safety. There is one more thing. The photograph you have carried with you all your life, the one in the wooden frame. Your mother gave that to you the night she left this town. Do not break it. Do not let it out of your sight. Not yet. There will come a moment when you have read enough, when you will understand why. Your father loved you, Ren. He never got to hold you for very long, but he loved you. He used to put his hand on your mother's belly and talk to you. He used to say your name out loud before you were even born, as if practicing it. I have loved you every day of your life. You were never alone. I promise. I promise. Iris. Ren sat on the floor of the shed for a long time. She did not cry. She had cried in the parking lot in Harrisburg. She had no more tears for the moment. Instead, she felt something else moving inside her, slow and large, like a river that had been frozen for years and had finally begun to thaw. Her father. Her father had a name. Her father had been a Marine. Her father had been a journalist. Her father had put his hand on her mother's belly and said her name out loud. Her father had been murdered. She read the letter again, and then again. When she was done, she stood up. She lifted the lid of the trunk. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them organized into bundles tied with cotton string. Letters, a leather-bound journal thick and worn with a strip of red ribbon marking a page, newspaper clippings in plastic sleeves, a folded American flag in a triangular case, and resting on top of the journal, a small framed photograph she had never seen before. It showed a young man in a flannel shirt standing in the orchard outside. He was holding a baby. The baby was wrapped in a yellow blanket. The young man was smiling the same small smile she had seen in the Marine Corps portrait upstairs, except now it was not practiced. Now it was real. Now it was the smile of a man holding his daughter for the first time. She turned the photograph over, written on the back in pencil in a hand that looked very much like her mother's, were 5 words. Beckett and Wren, November 2002. She held the photograph against her chest. She closed her eyes. She did not know how long she stood like that. The lantern light flickered against the walls. The shed was very quiet. Outside, somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then went still. Eventually, she opened her eyes and went back to the trunk. She picked up the journal. She untied the red ribbon. She turned to the page her grandmother had marked. The handwriting was different from her grandmother's, smaller, tighter. The hand of a man used to writing quickly in notebooks while standing up. October 14th, 2002. The entry began. Met with Elias Marsh today at the diner off Route 22. 3rd time. He is finally ready to go on record. He has the original lab reports from 1987. He has the falsified ones the company submitted to the state. He has the payment records showing $270,000 wired to the personal account of the man we will not yet name in these pages. He is afraid. He should be. So am I. But this is the story. This is the one I have been chasing for 6 years. This is the one that will finally finish them. Delia is due in November. I told her tonight that I love her more than I love this story. She said she knows. She said she would not have married me if I were the kind of man who could love anything more than the truth. She said she just needed me to live long enough to meet the baby. I am going to live long enough to meet the baby. I am going to live long enough to do a great deal more than that. Wren's hand was trembling now. She turned the page. October 28th, 2002. Marsh has gone silent. 3 days, no contact. Drove to his house. He is gone. So is his wife. Neighbor says they left in the night. No forwarding address. I have a feeling. I have a very bad feeling. November 9th, 2002. The baby is here. A girl. Delia named her Wren after the bird her mother used to feed on the windowsill when she was small. She has her mother's mouth. She has my eyes. I held her for an hour and I cried like a child. I do not remember the last time I cried. November 22nd, 2002. Marsh found dead in a motel outside Pittsburgh. Coroner says heart attack. Marsh was 46 years old and ran 6 miles a day. I do not believe it. Neither does the wife. She called me from a payphone. She has the documents. She says she will mail them to a P.O. box and that I should never contact her again. January 6, 2003. The documents arrived. They are everything Marsh said they were. They are more than that. I have not slept in 2 days. I cannot stop looking at them. Delia is begging me to go to the state attorney general. I cannot. The attorney general is in the photographs. The attorney general is the man whose name is on the wire transfer. February 11th, 2003. Going to meet the Inquirer reporter tonight. Driving to Harrisburg. Will be back by morning. Delia is asleep. I kissed Wren on the forehead. She made the little sound she makes when she is dreaming. I love them. God, I love them. The entry ended there. The next page was blank. Wren stared at the blank page. February 11th, 2003. That was the night her father had died. She read the entry one more time. She read the words, I will be back by morning. She read the words, I kissed Wren on the forehead. She read the words, God, I love them. She closed the journal. She sat on the floor of the shed with the journal in her lap and the lantern flickering and the smell of cedar and lavender and old paper all around her. And for the first time in 23 years, she understood what she had been carrying. She had not been an orphan because she was unwanted. She had been an orphan because someone had decided that she should be. The grief that came up in her chest then was not new grief. It was old grief, ancient grief, grief that had been waiting in her body for 23 years to finally be allowed to come out. She did not fight it. She let it come. She bent forward over the journal and made a sound she did not know she was capable of making. When she could breathe again, she stood up. She walked to the back of the shed. She had noticed something a few minutes earlier and pushed it aside in her mind because there had been too much to take in. But she remembered it now. A piece of canvas tarp hanging on the back wall between two shelves where there should have been nothing but the inside of the outer wall. The tarp hung loose. It moved slightly in the air. She walked to it. She lifted it. Behind the tarp was a door. The door was wooden. It was narrow. It had been painted the same red as the outside of the shed. It had a small iron handle. She put her hand on the handle. It turned. The door opened inward onto darkness and onto the top of a wooden staircase descending into the ground. A faint, warm light flickered somewhere below. Wren stood at the top of the staircase with her hand on the doorframe and looked down. She thought of her grandmother's letter. There is more of it in a place I will tell you about when you have read enough to understand. She thought of the way Vance Pritchard's hands had tightened when he mentioned the shed. She thought of the dog that had barked once outside and then gone still. She lifted the lantern from the workbench. She stepped onto the first stair. The wood creaked beneath her weight, but held. She took another step, then another. The staircase went down for perhaps 15 steps. The walls on either side were stone. Fieldstone, the kind farmers had stacked into walls in Pennsylvania for 200 years. The air grew slightly warmer as she descended. The smell of cedar and lavender grew stronger. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a room. She stopped on the last step. She raised the lantern. The room was perhaps 20 feet long and 15 feet wide. The ceiling was low, but not oppressive. The walls were the same fieldstone as the staircase. The floor was packed earth covered with woven rugs. It was a working office, a serious one. A long wooden desk stood against one wall. On the desk sat a typewriter and old steel-cased Underwood with a fresh ribbon. Beside the typewriter was a stack of legal pads, a coffee mug full of pens, and a green-shaded banker's lamp. A row of filing cabinets stretched along another wall. 5 of them. Tall, dark green metal, the kind that lived in the back rooms of small-town law offices in the 1970s. Above the desk, the wall was covered with a map of 3 counties in central Pennsylvania. Red pushpins were stuck into the map at perhaps 200 different locations. Each pushpin had a small paper tag attached to it. The tags were too small for Wren to read from where she stood. To the right of the map was a cork board. The cork board was covered with photographs, black and white photographs of men in suits, photographs of buildings, photographs of documents, photographs of what looked like wire transfer slips blown up large. Across the room, on a small wooden table beneath a hanging lantern that was already lit, sat a leather-bound book that looked almost identical to the journal upstairs. Beside it sat a fresh pot of coffee. Steam was still rising from the spout. Someone had been here, recently. Within the last hour, perhaps. Wren did not move. She listened. The room was very quiet. The lantern she had been holding was no longer the only source of light. The hanging lantern over the small table cast a warm circle on the rug beneath it. Beyond that circle, in the far corner of the room, was a doorway she had not noticed at first. A doorway with another canvas tarp hanging across it like the one upstairs. The tarp moved. A man stepped through it. He was tall and thin and stooped slightly at the shoulders. His hair was white. He wore a brown wool cardigan over a flannel shirt with corduroy trousers and worn leather boots. His face was weathered the way only farmers and old soldiers ever weathered deep lines around the eyes, a stubble of white beard along the jaw. He held a coffee cup in one hand and a flashlight in the other, switched off. He had her grandmother's eyes. She knew because she had seen them in the Marine Corps portrait upstairs, and again in the photograph of her father holding her in the orchard. Soft, gray-green kind, in a way that looked permanent and exhausted at the same time. He stopped when he saw her. He did not look surprised. He looked instead like a man who had been waiting for a very long time and had finally heard the door he had been listening for. He set the coffee cup down carefully on the small table. "Your grandmother told me to wait for you," he said. His voice was rough but soft. Wren said nothing. The lantern was heavy in her hand. The stone of the cellar pressed in around them. She could hear her own heart beating in her ears. "My name is Garrett Holloway," he said. "I was your father's friend. I have been a friend of this family for 50 years. There are things you need to know, Wren. Things that are going to be very hard to hear. And I am sorry, but I have to tell you something first." He looked at her steadily. "You may not be safe in this town. Not tonight, not until we have moved certain things. I have been keeping an eye on the road since the lawyer left, and there is a truck parked half a mile down the highway that was not there this morning. It has not moved in 3 hours. I do not know who is in it, but I would like to assume the worst." He lifted the coffee cup again, took a slow sip, set it down. "Sit down, sweetheart," he said. "We have work to do and not much time." Garrett Holloway had moved a chair to the corner of the room before Wren arrived. She did not realize that at first. She only noticed as he gestured for her to sit that there were 2 chairs at the small wooden table where the second journal lay, and that the second chair was angled slightly outward as if it had been pulled out and waiting. He had known what time she would come down those stairs. He had known to within the hour. She sat. The lantern in her hand she set on the floor beside her boot. Garrett moved slowly. He poured a second cup of coffee from the pot and slid it across the table toward her. He did not say anything for a long moment. He let her look at the room. He let her see it all, the filing cabinets, the map with its red pins, the corkboard of black and white photographs, the typewriter on the long desk with a half-finished page still rolled into the platen. He gave her the silence she needed. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than it had been at the doorway. "Your grandmother bought this farm in 1972, he said. "She and your grandfather. They paid $11,400 for it in cash, with money your grandfather had saved from 22 years of work at the steel mill in Bethlehem. Iris was 33 years old. She had your mother in her arms. She told me once that the day they signed the papers was the happiest day of her life, because for the first time she could see the rest of her life laid out in front of her in a way she could hold." Wren wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. It was very warm. She did not drink. "Your grandfather died in 1981, Garrett said. "Cancer. They had been married 26 years. Iris ran this farm by herself for the next 38 years. She raised your mother. She raised her alone, and she did it well, and your mother grew up here in this orchard." He gestured upward toward the wooden ceiling. "She used to sit in the apple tree at the end of the second row and read books for hours. Iris used to come out and call her in for dinner 3 or 4 times before she would finally come down. I watched her grow up, Wren. I watched your mother grow up the way I would have watched a niece grow up. I never had children of my own. Neither did your grandmother after Delia. So we both in different ways made do." "What happened to my father?" Wren said. Garrett looked at her. "I am going to tell you," he said. "All of it, but there is a lot of it. So you are going to have to be patient with me for a few minutes. She nodded. He took a breath. Your father came home from the Marines in the spring of 1990, Garrett said. He had been at Camp Lejeune. You know that name. You have probably never paid much attention to it, but you will pay attention now. In the 1980s, when your father served there, the drinking water on that base was poisoned. Industrial solvents, benzene, trichloroethylene. The men and women stationed there drank it and washed in it and bathed their children in it. Some of those children were born with birth defects. Some of them were not born at all. The Marines who lived on that base began dying of cancers that should not have hit men in their 30s and 40s. Your father knew 6 of them. He carried their names in his wallet for the rest of his life. He paused. He came home angry. He took a job at the Sentinel as a junior reporter because he had wanted to be a journalist before he had ever wanted to be a soldier. He worked his way up. By 1998, he was the editor. By 2001, he had begun looking into a chemical company called Calderwood, headquartered 40 miles from here in a town called Chickasha. Calderwood, Wren said. The word was already familiar. She had read it in her father's journal not 20 minutes ago. Garrett nodded. Calderwood made industrial coolants, paints, and degreasers. They had a facility on the Susquehanna River that operated from 1968 to 1998. For 30 years, they dumped untreated chemical waste into the groundwater of 3 counties. Cancer rates in the towns downstream were 3 to 5 times the state average. Stillbirths, childhood leukemias, farm animals born with defects, wells that smelled wrong if you stood close enough. People knew Wren. People knew for years. But every time someone tried to make noise about it, the noise stopped. A reporter at the Wilkes Barre paper started a series in 1989 and was fired 6 weeks in for, quote, fabricating sources. A state environmental inspector named Howard Tice filed a report in 1994 recommending the plant be shut down. He was reassigned to a desk in Erie, and his report disappeared. Your father knew about those people. He kept their stories in a folder in this office. He believed them. He believed all of them. Wren looked toward the filing cabinets along the wall. He found a man, Garrett said, an engineer at Calderwood. The man's name was Elias Marsh. Marsh had worked at the plant since 1981. He had access to the internal lab reports, the ones that showed the true contamination levels, and to the falsified reports that were submitted to the state. Marsh had been carrying around a duffel bag of documents in the trunk of his car for almost 3 years before your father found him. He was a heavy man, a quiet man. He had a wife named Lorraine and 2 grown daughters. He was a Methodist who tithed every Sunday. He decided to tell the truth, Wren. He decided to tell the truth, and 3 weeks later, he was dead in a motel room outside Pittsburgh of what the coroner ruled was a heart attack. And my father, Wren said. Garrett's eyes did not leave hers. Your father had the documents, he said. Marcia's wife had mailed them to him before she disappeared. Your father had everything. The lab reports, the wire transfers, the names. He had set up a meeting with an investigative reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer for the night of February the 11th, 2003. He was driving south on Route 11. He never made it past the iron bridge over Drumheller Creek. His pickup truck went through the guardrail at 11:47 at night. The state police said the road was icy. The truck rolled 3 times and came to rest upside down in the creek bed. Your father was found dead at the scene. The county coroner ruled it an accident. Garrett's voice grew very quiet. It was not an accident. Wren did not move. The coffee in her hands had gone almost cold without her noticing. "How do you know?" she said. He stood up. He walked to the third filing cabinet from the left. He pulled open the second drawer. He removed a thick green folder. He carried it back to the table and laid it down between them. He opened the folder. The first page was a photograph. It was an enlargement of what looked like a section of metal, a brake line. There was a clean diagonal cut across it, sharp and deliberate, with a notch on either end where pliers or a small bench vise had held it steady. Underneath the photograph, in careful handwriting, was a date. June 14th, 2009. 6 years after her father's death. Your grandmother spent 6 years, Garrett said, fighting with the Pennsylvania State Police to release the truck for private inspection. She spent another year finding a forensic engineer in Ohio who would do the inspection honestly. The truck had been stored in an impound lot the entire time. The brake line on the front passenger side had been cut 3/4 of the way through with a clean blade. Not corroded, not worn, cut. The engineer signed an affidavit. The state police did not reopen the case. The county coroner had retired by then to Florida. The original autopsy file had been, quote, lost in a basement flood in 2007. He turned the page. The next document was the affidavit, signed and notarized. The next was a photograph of the truck mud-caked and crushed with a tarp half pulled back to expose the underside. The next was a list, names and dates. Wren scanned it. State troopers, coroners, insurance adjusters, the editor of the Bramble Hollow Sentinel, who had killed her father's story after his death, the county judge who had refused to grant Iris standing to request the truck. Each name had a small notation beside it. Each notation was a dollar amount. Some of those dollar amounts were very large. Your grandmother spent 23 years, Garrett said, and most of what was left of her savings paying private investigators, forensic specialists, and lawyers in 3 states. She sold off pieces of the orchard one by one to keep going. The 11 acres you inherited are what is left of what was once a 60-acre farm. She did this quietly. She did it carefully. She never went to the FBI because she did not trust them yet. She did not have the one piece of evidence that would have made it impossible for them to ignore her. She came close several times, but each time the witness disappeared, or the document went missing, or the lawyer stopped returning her calls. He looked at her steadily.
She kept going anyway, he said, because of you.
Wren swallowed. Why didn't she come for me? She whispered. If she was looking, if she found me. Garrett's face changed then. For the first time since she had walked down the stairs, she saw something crack underneath the calm.
Because the man we are after, he said, found your mother the moment she came out of hiding.
It took her a moment to understand.
My mother, she said.
Sit with this for a minute,
Garrett said gently. I know it is a lot, but she was already understanding. My mother was not killed by a drunk driver. He shook his head. In the spring of 2014, Garrett said, your mother contacted your grandmother for the first time in 11 years. She had been hiding in Erie and then in Buffalo and then in a small town in northern Ohio. She had taken every job that paid in cash. She had kept you off every record she could keep you off of. She enrolled you in a public school for the first time only when you turned 8 because she had no other choice. She wrote your grandmother a letter in March of 2014. She said she could not keep running. She said she was tired. She said she had been to a forensic lab in Cleveland and had paid $2,000 to have your father's shirt tested, the shirt she had taken from the wreckage and saved for 11 years, and that the lab had found traces of a particular industrial solvent on the fabric that was, quote, inconsistent with the materials present in the vehicle at the time of impact. Solvent from the Calderwood plant. Solvent that had no business being on his clothing unless someone had grabbed him with hands that had recently been working at that plant. Garrett's voice went rough. He cleared it once.
Your mother said she was coming home. She said it was time. She said she wanted you to grow up knowing who your grandmother was. She said she was driving down from Cleveland in 2 weeks. She said she was bringing you.
I remember, Wren whispered. She did remember. She remembered suddenly in a way she had not remembered in years. She remembered her mother packing a small green suitcase. She remembered her mother saying, we're going to meet someone very important. She remembered eating gas station sandwiches in a car that smelled like dust and old upholstery. She remembered the highway in Pennsylvania at night, the headlights, the way her mother had looked over at her in the passenger seat and smiled. She remembered the truck. It had not come from behind. It had come from the side. It had run the stop sign at an intersection in the middle of nowhere on a 2-lane road outside a town she had never learned the name of at 9:43 in the evening on April the 2nd, 2014. Her mother had not seen it. There had been no time to brake. The truck had hit the driver's side of their car at 68 miles an hour, the state police would later estimate, and the car had spun 3 times and come to rest in a ditch on the shoulder, and her mother had been dead before the spinning stopped. Wren had been buckled into the passenger seat. The airbag on her side had deployed. She had been bruised. She had not been killed. She had been 11 years old. The driver of the truck had not stopped. The truck had been found the next morning abandoned on a logging road 11 miles from the scene. The truck had been stolen the previous night from a parking lot in Pittsburgh. The driver had never been identified. Wren put her face in her hands. Garrett did not speak. He let her have it. When she finally raised her head, her voice was steady. She did not know how. She suspected she would pay for that steadiness later in private with the long night of crying she had not yet earned the room to do. But for now, she was steady. "What was his name?" she said. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. "Whose name?" "The man," she said. "The man my father was about to expose. The man who ordered him killed. The man who ordered my mother killed. The man my grandmother spent 23 years chasing. What is his name?" Garrett closed the green folder slowly. He sat back in his chair. "His name," he said, "is Ellsworth Thatcher." The name meant nothing to Wren. It rang against her ears like a stone dropped into a pond, but she did not yet know its weight. She wanted Garrett's face. She waited. In 2003, Garrett said, Ellsworth Thatcher was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. He was 49 years old. He had been the district attorney of this county for 2 terms before that. He grew up 40 miles from this farm in a little place called Sugar Run, the son of a Lutheran pastor. He went to Lehigh on a scholarship. He went to Dickinson Law on another. He ran for district attorney at 31 and won. He was by every account that mattered the most ambitious man this part of the state had ever produced. Garrett's mouth went tight. He was also beginning in 1987 and continuing for the next 16 years on the payroll of Calderwood Chemical. They paid him in cash and property and eventually in wire transfers routed through 3 shell companies in Delaware. The total by your grandmother's reckoning comes to just over $4 million. In exchange, he made certain investigations go away. He made certain complaints disappear from the docket. He made certain witnesses change their minds. He made certain reporters lose their jobs. Garrett paused. When your father got close to him, he was no longer just the Attorney General. He was about to announce his run for the United States Senate. He won that race in November of 2004. He served 2 terms. He retired from the Senate 2 years ago at the age of 80. He is now 82 years old. He lives in a house on Lake Wallenpaupack with a view of the water. He gives speeches at colleges. He sits on 3 corporate boards. There is a wing of the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Wilkes-Barre named after him. He is in this state considered a kind of grand old man, a statesman, a treasure. Wren stared at him. And his grandson?
Garrett said. A man named Sutton Thatcher is currently the front runner in next year's race for governor.
Wren let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. How are we supposed to fight him? She said. How is anyone supposed to fight him? Garrett looked at her for a long moment.
Your grandmother believed,
he said, that we had finally gotten close enough. She believed that the evidence in this room, combined with one last document she had not yet recovered, would be enough. She did not live to recover it, but she left instructions. Specific instructions. There is a safe deposit box at the Susquehanna Valley Bank in Harrisburg. The key is hidden in this house. I do not know where. She did not tell me. She said she would tell you when the time was right. She said the box contains the one piece of evidence that has not yet been duplicated, has not yet been lost, and has not yet been corrupted. She said it has been sitting in that box untouched since 2009. He stood up.
I will help you, Wren, he said. I am an old man, and I am tired, and there is a great deal more I will have to tell you before this is finished. But I will help you. Your father was my friend. Your mother was my friend. Your grandmother was my dearest friend in this world. I owe them. I owe you. I will help you for as long as I am breathing. He extended his hand across the table. Wren looked at it. She did not take it yet, but she nodded slowly and she said, Tomorrow. Tomorrow, he agreed. She slept that night in her grandmother's bed under the rose-colored quilt with the framed photograph of her father in his Marine Corps uniform on the nightstand beside her. She did not dream. When she woke, the sky was the pale silver of a Pennsylvania morning in early November, and she knew exactly what she had to do. She drove into Bramble Hollow at 8:45. The town was small. 2 stoplights, a row of brick storefronts along Main Street, half of them empty, the other half hanging on by their fingernails, a diner called May's, a hardware store, a barber shop with a candy-striped pole that no longer turned. The Methodist church Vance Pritchard had mentioned white clapboard with a green roof, the bell in the tower, silent at this hour. Behind the church, exactly where he had said it would be, stood a small office with a brass plaque that read, Pritchard and Associates Attorneys at Law, established 1981. She did not go to Pritchard's office. She went 2 blocks past it to the Bramble Hollow Hall of Records. The building was a single story of yellow brick with a concrete handicap ramp running up the side. Inside, the front counter was staffed by a woman of perhaps 60 with a steel gray bob and glasses on a beaded chain. The plaque on her desk said Doreen Mickle Clerk. Doreen looked up when Wren came in, and Doreen's expression shifted in a way Wren had not expected. Something like recognition, something like wariness. Can I help you? Doreen said. I would like to request the police accident report and coroner's file for an incident that occurred on February 11th, 2003, Wren said. The decedent was Beckett Calloway. The location was the iron bridge over Drumheller Creek on Route 11. Doreen Mickle did not move for a long moment. Then she said very carefully, "And your name?" "Wren Calloway." Doreen blinked.
She stood up. She went into the back. She was gone for perhaps 4 minutes. When she returned, she had a single thin manila folder in her hand. She set it on the counter between them. "This is what we have," she said. Wren opened the folder. Inside were 3 pages. A 1-page state police accident report dated February the 12th, 2003. A 1-page coroner's summary dated the same, and a small slip of paper attached with a paperclip dated September 12th, 2008 that read, "Original file removed for review by request of County Council. Returned items only." Wren looked up at Doreen. "Where is the rest of it?" she said. Doreen Mickle held her eyes. "Miss Calloway," she said very quietly, "I have worked at this desk for 31 years. I worked here when that file came in. I worked here when it was quote-unquote reviewed. I want you to know 2 things. The first is that I do not know what happened to the rest of that file. The second is that I knew your mother. She was 3 years younger than me in school. She was a kind girl. She did not deserve what happened to her, and neither did your father, and neither did your grandmother." Doreen reached into the drawer beneath the counter. She removed an envelope. She slid it across. "Your grandmother left this with me 4 years ago," Doreen said. "She said you might come asking one day. She said if you did, I should give this to you and I should not put it in any log and I should never mention it to anyone." Wren took the envelope. "Thank you," she said. Doreen Mickle nodded once and looked down at her keyboard. Wren left the building. She did not open the envelope in the car. She drove to the next stop on the list she had made in her head before she left the farm that morning. The Bramble Hollow County Hospital on the other side of town, a low brick building with a chapel attached to the back. She parked. She went in. She walked past the front desk without stopping the way her mother had taught her years ago, head up like she belonged there. She found the medical records department on the 2nd floor. The woman behind the counter was younger, maybe 40. She looked at Wren with the polite professional smile of someone who handled difficult requests all day. "I am here," Wren said, "to request the post-mortem records for my father, Beckett Calloway. He died February 11th, 2003. He was brought to this hospital. I am his next of kin." The woman typed for a moment. Her face changed. "I am sorry, miss," she said. "I am not finding a record under that name." "Could you check by date?" The woman typed again. She frowned. "I am sorry," she said. "There is no record from that date matching that name. Are you sure the body was brought to this hospital?" "I am sure." The woman shrugged apologetically. "It is possible," she said, "that older records have been archived off-site. I can put in a request. It may take several weeks."
Is there anyone in this building, Wren said, who would have been working here in 2003?
The woman hesitated. Pearl Whitford, she said finally. She is in the maternity ward. She has been here since 1979. She is retiring in March. Wren found Pearl Whitford on the 4th floor. Pearl was small and round, with white hair pinned up in a bun, and a face that had laughed easily for many decades. She was reorganizing a supply cabinet when Wren approached her. She looked up. She looked at Wren's face. Her hand went very slowly to her chest. "Lord have mercy," Pearl whispered. "You are Delia's girl."
I am,
Wren said. Pearl Whitford put her hands over her mouth. She took Wren by the wrist and walked her into a small staff lounge at the end of the hall. She closed the door. She made Wren sit down. She poured Wren a paper cup of water from a cooler. She sat across from her and shook her head and shook her head and finally said, "I delivered you. I delivered you, sweetheart, in this hospital 2 days before Thanksgiving in 2002. Your mama was so beautiful. Your daddy stood in this hallway and could not stop smiling." Wren felt the tears coming up. She held them back. She had work to do. "Mrs. Whitford," she said, "I need to ask you something. Please. I need you to tell me the truth, even if you have not told it to anyone else in 23 years. Pearl Whitford took her hand. "Ask baby." "Did you see my father's body?" Wren said. "When they brought him in, the night of the accident, February 11th, 2003. Pearl Whitford went very still. She looked at the floor. She looked at the ceiling. She looked back at Wren, and her eyes were full. "I was working the night shift," she said. "I came in at 7. The ambulance brought him in just after midnight. I was not assigned to that case, but I walked past the room. I saw him. I knew him from town. He had been our neighbor for years. I knew right away." Her voice dropped. "He had bruises on his face that did not match the accident." "What does that mean?" "It means," Pearl said, "that I have delivered a lot of trauma patients in my time, sweetheart, and I have seen a lot of bodies brought in from car wrecks, and the bruising patterns on your father's face and neck were not consistent with the steering wheel impact or a windshield. He had a contusion on his jaw that looked like a fist. He had marks on his throat that looked like fingers." Pearl was crying now quietly, the kind of crying that came after 23 years of swallowing something. "I told the attending physician. The attending physician told me to mind my business and finish my shift. The next morning, the coroner signed it off as a motor vehicle accident, and the body was released, and that was that." "Did you ever say anything?" Wren whispered. Pearl Whitford shook her head. "I was a single mother, sweetheart. I had 3 children to feed and a mortgage. The attending physician was the brother-in-law of the district attorney, who was a man named Ellsworth Thatcher, who later became a United States Senator, and who in this town you did not cross." I am ashamed of that. I have been ashamed of that for 23 years. I am very, very sorry. She squeezed Rin's hand hard.
But sweetheart, she said, I kept a copy. Rin went very still. I made a photocopy, Pearl said, of the intake notes. I made it the night he was brought in. I did not know why. I did not know what I would ever do with it. I have kept it in a box in my attic ever since. I would like to give it to you, if you will give me a day to find it.
Thank you, Rin whispered.
Pearl Whitford stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Your daddy was a good man, she said. Your mama loved him so much. You come back tomorrow, sweetheart. I will have it for you tomorrow. Rin left the hospital with the envelope from Doreen Mickle still unopened in her jacket pocket. She got into her car. She drove out to the edge of town. She pulled off the road into a gravel lot beside a closed-down ice cream stand and parked under a bare maple tree. The light was thin and yellow. The wind moved the branches above her car. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy. It was an autopsy diagram, the kind with a generic outline of a human body front and back, on which the coroner marked injuries. Across the chest and the face of the diagram were a dozen small notations in pen. A circle on the jaw, a circle on the throat, a circle on the upper back between the shoulder blades. Each circle had a small handwritten note next to it. The notes were not in the handwriting of the coroner who had signed the official report. Rin knew this because she had seen that man's handwriting on the summary page Doreen Mickle had given her at the records office. The summary had been written in tight slanted print. The notes on this diagram were written in a looser, faster hand. A hand that had been in a hurry. A hand that had not wanted to be there long. At the bottom of the page, in the same hurried hand, was a single sentence. This was not a vehicular fatality. This man was beaten before the crash. It was signed with 2 initials. Ajay Rin did not know who AJ was, but she would find out. She drove back to the farm in the gathering dusk. She did not stop. She did not even look at the town as she passed through it. By the time she pulled up the long gravel drive, the sky was the color of a bruise and Garrett Holloway was standing on the porch waiting for her. She told him what she had found. He nodded. He had expected as much. He told her he knew the name on those initials. AJ stood for Albert James Kettering, a young assistant in the coroner's office at the time who had quit 2 months later and moved to Vermont. Iris had tried to reach him in 2011. He had not returned her calls. He may still be alive, Garrett said. He may yet talk, but that is a road for another day. Tonight, we need to think about the safe deposit box. They went inside. Rin made a pot of soup from the pantry. They ate at the kitchen table. They talked low, even though there was no one in the house but them. Garrett told her stories about her father. The time Beckett had crashed his bicycle into a fence post at 12 and refused to cry until he got inside the house.
The time Beckett had stood up in a town council meeting at 25 and called a county commissioner a liar to his face. The way Beckett had held Wren the day she was born and told her very seriously in the maternity ward that he was going to teach her how to throw a baseball.
Wren listened and did not interrupt.
After dinner, she went upstairs. She walked through the house slowly, the way she imagined her grandmother had walked through it for the last 23 years. She did not know where to look for the safe deposit key. Her grandmother had said in the letter that there would come a moment when Wren had read enough when she would understand. So Wren tried to understand. She walked through every room. She opened drawers. She looked under rugs. She lifted picture frames off walls and looked behind them. She found nothing. She came back finally to her grandmother's bedroom. She stood in the doorway. The room was the way it had been left. The bed made, the quilt smoothed, the reading glasses on the nightstand, the photograph of her father on the dresser, the small framed picture of an apple branch in spring on the wall above the dresser. Wren walked to the dresser. She knelt on the floor. She ran her fingers along the baseboard. The third floorboard from the wall beneath the dresser was slightly loose. She pulled at it. It came up with a soft squeak. Inside the small hollow underneath, lying on a square of folded blue velvet, was a small brass key. Beside the key was a piece of paper with a number written on it. Box 4081, Susquehanna Valley Bank, Harrisburg. She slept that night with the key under her pillow. In the morning, they drove to Harrisburg. Garrett insisted on coming along. Wren agreed. The drive took just under 2 hours. The interstate cut through hills the color of rust and bone. The sky was a hard, pale blue. Wren did not speak much. Garrett did not press her. He drove. She watched the trees. The Susquehanna Valley Bank stood on a corner in downtown Harrisburg, a heavy brownstone building with a portico and tall iron doors. They went inside. A clerk took them down to the vault. The vault was lined with steel boxes. The clerk used a master key, and Wren used her grandmother's key, and together they opened box 4081, and the clerk left them alone in the small viewing room. Wren lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items: a small cassette tape in a clear plastic case, a folded document, perhaps 4 pages, sealed with a notary stamp, and a smaller envelope with a single line of writing across the front in her grandmother's hand. The writing said, "For Wren, when you understand." She did not open that envelope yet. She lifted the cassette. The label on the cassette read, in faded blue pen, E. Marsh, October 14th, 2002 second meeting. She lifted the document and unfolded it carefully. It was a sworn affidavit dated 2002, signed by Elias Marsh. and witnessed by two other Calderwood employees whose names Wren did not recognize. Garrett read it over her shoulder and made a small sound in the back of his throat. "Both witnesses are dead," he said quietly. "I knew that, but this affidavit, this is what your father had. This is the document Marsh was going to testify behind. This is the thing they killed him for." Wren put the affidavit back in the box. She put the cassette in her jacket pocket. She kept the small envelope with her grandmother's writing on it. She would open that one later. Not here. Not with the clerk waiting on the other side of the door. They walked out of the bank into the cold afternoon. The light had begun to slant low over the rooftops. They got into Garrett's pickup and drove out of the city. The interstate took them north through the rolling hills into the long shadow of the early evening. They were 40 minutes from Bramble Hollow when she noticed the headlights behind them. It was an ordinary pair of headlights. White set high, the kind of headlights that belong to a pickup truck or a small SUV. She would not have noticed them at all, except that they had been behind them for a long time. Through 2 exits, through a long curve, through a section of road where every other vehicle had peeled off into the gas stations and the small county routes. Garrett did not seem to notice. He was driving carefully. He was telling her about a man in town named Holm Stallworth, who used to run the Calderwood plant in the 1980s and was now 91 years old and living in a memory care facility in Scranton. Wren watched the mirror. She waited at a small intersection 2 miles outside of Bramble Hollow. Garrett pulled into the parking lot of a Sheetz gas station. He said he needed to use the restroom. He said he would only be a minute. Wren said she would wait in the truck. The headlights behind them did not pull into the Sheetz. They kept going down Route 11. Wren watched them go. She sat in the passenger seat for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she leaned across the cab and looked at the dashboard. Garrett's phone was sitting in the center console screen down. She had not before that moment ever thought of doing what she did next. She picked up the phone. The screen lit up. There was no passcode. The lock screen was a photograph of her grandmother and a younger Garrett standing in front of an apple tree. She swiped up. The most recent text message thread was open. The thread had been opened, she could see by the timestamp, 11 minutes earlier, while she had been looking out the window, while she had been thinking about the cassette in her pocket. There were 2 messages. The first had been sent at 4:07 that afternoon from the parking lot of the Susquehanna Valley Bank. It read, "She has the tape, the Marsh tape, and the affidavit, and 1 more envelope that she has not opened yet. She is going to find the rest before the end of the week." The recipient was a contact saved only as VP. The second message had come in 3 minutes later. It read, "Stay close. Tell me where she sleeps tonight. We will move tomorrow." Wren stared at the screen. She stared at it for a long time. She heard the bathroom door of the Sheetz close in the distance. She heard footsteps on gravel. She set the phone back exactly where it had been screened down in the center console. She sat back in her seat. She put her hands flat on her thighs to keep them from shaking. She watched Garrett Holloway come out of the gas station, the man who had been her father's friend, the man who had been her grandmother's dearest friend in the world, the man who had told her stories about her father at the kitchen table the night before, the man who was now walking toward the truck with 2 cups of coffee in his hands and a small, kind smile on his weathered face. And she understood that she was for the first time since she had opened the red shed door entirely alone. He climbed into the cab. He handed her a coffee.
"You all right, sweetheart?"
he said.
"You look pale."
Wren took the coffee. She made her voice steady. She had been making her voice steady for 23 years. "I am just tired," she said. "It has been a long day." "It has been a long week," Garrett said gently. "Let me get you home." He put the truck in gear. The headlights ahead of them on Route 11 had vanished into the dusk. The road was empty. The sky was almost dark. Wren held the coffee in her lap and watched the white line on the side of the highway slip past in the headlights, and she thought of the cassette in her pocket and the small unopened envelope from her grandmother, and the 4 people in the world she had ever trusted, all of whom were now dead. And she thought very clearly, very calmly, the way her mother had once taught her to think when she was scared. "I am going to have to do the rest of this by myself." The truck rolled on into the dark, toward Bramble Hollow, toward the farmhouse, toward the red shed at the edge of the orchard where her grandmother had been waiting for her for 23 years. Wren took a sip of the coffee. It was very hot. It steadied her hands. She did not say another word the whole way home. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her grandmother's bed under the rose-colored quilt and listened to the house breathe around her. The grandfather clock in the front hall struck 11 and then midnight and then 1. The wind moved through the orchard. A branch tapped against the bedroom window every few minutes, light and irregular, like a finger that did not quite know what it was trying to say. She lay still. She kept her eyes open. She thought about Garrett's face in the cab of the truck when he had handed her the coffee. The way the kindness in it had not slipped, not even a little. 23 years of pretending. 23 years of sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table and telling stories about Beckett and Delia and meaning it when he laughed. He had meant it. That was the thing she could not get past. He had meant it, and he had still been the one sending the messages. She thought about Vance Pritchard sitting in the parlor with his hands folded in his lap, telling her about the trust and the well and the property taxes. The way his fingers had tightened very slightly when he mentioned the shed. She understood that now. She understood that he had not been nervous because of what was in the shed. He had been nervous because he had not yet been told whether she would be allowed to find out. She thought about her grandmother. The years and years of patience. The way Iris had let Garrett walk in and out of this house for half a century, sit at her table hold her hand at her husband's funeral, help her with the apple harvest every fall, all the while knowing what he had done in 2003, knowing and saying nothing, letting him stay close so she could see what he reported and to whom. Wren tried to imagine the kind of strength that took. She could not. She thought about her mother, about the small green suitcase, about the 11 years they had moved together, town to town, motel to motel. She thought about the look her mother had given her in the car the night of April 2nd, 2014. The small, tired smile that meant we are almost there. She thought about how that smile had been the last thing she had ever seen her mother do. She thought about her father, about the entry in the journal. I kissed Wren on the forehead. She made the little sound she makes when she is dreaming. When the clock struck 3, she got out of bed. She moved quietly. She did not turn on a light. She knew the house well enough by now to find her way in the dark. She went down the stairs in her socks, avoiding the 3rd step, which creaked, and the 7th, which complained. She went through the kitchen and out the back door. She did not put on her boots until she was on the porch. The night was cold and clear. The orchard was silver under a half moon. Her breath rose white from her mouth as she crossed the grass. She did not go to the shed. She went to the henhouse. The henhouse stood on the far side of the backyard behind the garden, a small wooden structure her grandmother had built sometime in the 1980s. It was empty now. The hens were gone. The roost still smelled faintly of straw. Wren had noticed something there the morning after she arrived, and she had not yet had a moment alone to look at it properly. Under the floorboards of the henhouse, sealed inside a watertight metal canister, her grandmother had once used for storing seed. She had hidden the cassette tape and the affidavit the moment she got home from Harrisburg. She had done it while Garrett was outside checking the road. She had not told him. She would not tell him. She lifted the floorboard. The canister was still there. She opened it. The cassette and the affidavit were still inside. She closed it again, replaced the floorboard, and stood up. She had not yet opened the small envelope from the safe deposit box. She had been carrying it in the inside pocket of her hoodie since the bank. She took it out now. She sat down on a stump at the edge of the garden. She held the envelope in her hands for a long moment, looking at her grandmother's writing on the front. For Wren, when you understand. She understood now. She understood enough. She opened it. Inside was a single folded page. Wren, the letter began. If you have opened this in the safe deposit box, do not read it there. Go somewhere private, somewhere no one can see you. Then read. There is something I have not told you. There is something I have not told anyone. I have been thinking about it for 23 years, and I do not know how to write it down even now. So I will be brief. I have been pretending not to know about Garrett. I have known since 2007. I have known the way a person knows that the floor of their own house is rotten under one specific board. I knew because I let him think I trusted him, and I watched what he did, and I watched what he said, and I watched the way certain things would happen in town. 2 days after Garrett came over for dinner and learned them, and one summer evening, I followed him to a phone booth outside the Texaco station and listened from across the road and heard him use a name I had heard before. I did not confront him. I made a decision instead. I decided that I would rather have him close than have him replaced by someone I could not see. He was useful to them only as long as I let him be useful, so I let him be useful. I gave him things I wanted them to know. I kept other things back. For 16 years, I kept other things back.
I am telling you this so you will not be surprised. I am telling you this so that when you find out, you will not waste a single hour grieving him. Grief is the most expensive thing a person can spend right now. Save it for me. Save it for your father. Save it for your mother. Do not give a single tear to Garrett Holloway. I am telling you this also because there is someone you can trust. Only one. Her name is Imogen Hartwell. She is a reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. She is 61 years old. She is the only journalist who ever got close enough to Ellsworth Thatcher to feel his teeth. He sued her for libel in 2004. The suit destroyed her career for almost a decade. She crawled back. She is now their senior investigative correspondent. She lives in Mount Airy. Her home address is at the bottom of this page. She is expecting you. I wrote to her 6 months ago when I knew my heart was failing, and I told her you would come. Do not call her. Do not email her. Drive to her house. Knock on her door. Bring the cassette and the affidavit and the autopsy diagram if you have been able to find it. Tell her I sent you. Tell her my name. She will know. I love you, Wren. I love you across a distance I never wanted there to be. Be careful. Be brave. Finish this. Iris. Wren read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope back in the inside pocket of her hoodie. She did not cry. She had used her crying earlier. She had things to do. She walked back to the house through the silver orchard. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom. She packed her duffel bag the way she had packed it 100 times in her life, fast and quiet, the muscle memory of a girl who had been ready to leave 100 rooms in the dark. She put the metal canister in the bottom of the bag. She put Pearl Whitford's photocopy in there with it. She put the framed photograph of her father in his Marine Corps uniform in there too, wrapped in a t-shirt. She left the carved wooden frame with her mother's picture sitting on the dresser exactly where she had set it before going to bed. She had a reason for that. She would understand the reason later when it mattered. At 4:30 in the morning, while the sky was still black and the moon had slipped behind the hills,
She crept down the back stairs in her boots with her duffel over her shoulder and walked across the yard to her car. She did not start the engine. She put the car in neutral and let it roll down the long gravel drive in silence, steering by moonlight until she was 100 yards from the house. Then she turned the key. The Honda coughed. It caught. She drove away.
She made it to Philadelphia at sunrise. The city was waking up. Trucks rumbled along Broad Street. The sky over the row houses was the pale gold of a coin warmed in someone's pocket. Wren had been to Philadelphia exactly once 3 years before on a Greyhound that broke down before she made it back to Pittsburgh. She did not know the streets. She did not know Mount Airy. She drove with the address her grandmother had written on the bottom of the letter taped to the dashboard, and she followed it the way her mother had once followed handwritten directions out of Buffalo. Imogen Hartwell's house was a narrow stone twin on a quiet block of leafless oaks. There was a small front yard, a wrought iron fence 3 steps up to a green painted door. A wreath of dried eucalyptus hung on the door. The curtains in the front window were open. A lamp was on inside. Wren parked. She sat in the car for a moment, both hands on the wheel. Her hands were shaking. They had not shaken in the truck with Garrett. They were shaking now, and she did not entirely know why. She got out. She walked up the steps. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately. A woman of perhaps 60 stood in the doorway in a navy bathrobe and reading glasses. Her hair was steel gray and cropped short. Her eyes were sharp. Her mouth, when it saw Wren, did something Wren could not quite read. "You have your father's eyes," Imogen Hartwell said. Wren did not know what to say to that. "Come in, honey," Imogen said. "It's cold. Come in. I have coffee." The kitchen at the back of the house smelled of toast and grapefruit. There was a small wooden table by a window that looked out into a tiny back garden full of brown hydrangea heads still standing on their stems. Imogen poured Wren a cup of coffee and sat down across from her and put both her hands flat on the table. "I have been waiting for you for 6 months," Imogen said. "Iris wrote to me in May. She said your name and your age and the way you took your coffee. She said you would come in November. She said you would be tired. She said you would be carrying something. I would like to see what you are carrying, please." Wren reached into her duffel. She pulled out the canister. She opened it on the table. She laid the cassette and the affidavit between them. Imogen looked at them. She did not touch them. "I want to be sure of something first," she said. "Iris told me one detail about her granddaughter that no one else would know. She said her granddaughter had a photograph of her mother in a hand-carved walnut frame, and that she had carried it since she was a baby, and that she never let it out of her sight." Imogen looked at Wren. "You are not carrying the frame." "I left it at the house." Imogen's eyes narrowed. "On purpose," Wren said. Imogen waited. "My grandmother told me in her letter not to break it. She told me there would come a moment when I would understand why." Wren took a breath.
I left it on the dresser because I think I'm supposed to. I think it has been waiting for that house. I think my mother left it there before I was born, and I have been carrying it back to it for 23 years.
Imogen Hartwell did not smile, but the look in her eyes shifted, and it became a different kind of look, and she nodded once slowly, and then she reached across the table and picked up the cassette. "All right," she said. "Let us begin." They worked for 3 days. Imogen had a contact at the FBI field office at 6th and Arch, a senior agent named Marjorie Renshaw, who had spent 11 years on the Organized Crime Task Force in Pittsburgh before transferring east. Imogen called her on the second morning. They met in a coffee shop in Center City, the three of them in a back booth with the cassette tape and the affidavit and the photocopy from Pearl Whitford and Wren's father's journal in a manila envelope on the table between them. Marjorie Renshaw was a thin black woman in her early 60s with iron gray hair and the still hands of someone who had been listening to dangerous people for a long time. She listened to Wren tell the story. She did not interrupt. When Wren was finished, Marjorie sat back in the booth and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Miss Calloway, I have been a federal agent for 34 years. In that time, I have seen many people walk into rooms like this one and tell me stories that turned out in the end to be true in 3 or 4 pieces and made up in the rest. Your story is not one of those. I have known about Ellsworth Thatcher since 2008. I have a file on him in a locked drawer. I have not been able to open that file because every time someone has tried to give me what they have on him, that person has been hurt or has disappeared or has changed their mind. You are the first person in 18 years to walk into a room with me, sit down at a table, and produce evidence that I think I can actually use." She tapped the envelope. "I am going to need to take this," she said. "I am going to have it authenticated. Forensic audio on the cassette. Handwriting analysis on the autopsy diagram. Independent verification on the affidavit. That takes time, Wren. I would like you to stay somewhere safe for the next 10 days. I have a safe house in Bucks County. I would like to put you there until we have what we need." Wren shook her head. "No," she said. Marjorie Renshaw raised her eyebrows. "I need to go back to the farm," Wren said. "That is the last place you should go," Marjorie said. "If what you are telling me is correct, that house is now actively watched. Garrett Holloway is reporting to Vance Pritchard. Pritchard is reporting to somebody very close to the Thatcher family, possibly directly to the Thatchers themselves. The moment you walk back into Bramble Hollow, they will know." "I know," Wren said. "That is the point." Imogen Hartwell looked at her carefully. Marjorie looked at her too. "I left something in the house," Wren said. "I think it is important. I think it is the thing my grandmother could never get to. I am going to go back and find it, and then I am going to walk it out the front door. And while I am doing it, I want you to be ready." Marjorie Renshaw was quiet. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." Wren told her. She drove back into Pennsylvania on the 4th morning. She drove carefully. She did not push the speed limit. She stopped twice for gas. She kept the duffel in the trunk.
but the duffel was now mostly empty. The cassette and the affidavit and the autopsy photocopy were no longer in it. Those were in a federal evidence locker in Philadelphia. What she had with her now were two new things. The first was a small recording device the size of a quarter taped to the inside of her bra, transmitting to a black SUV that would never be more than 3 miles behind her. The second was a sealed letter from Marjorie Renshaw, in case anything went wrong that authorized any federal agent in any state to take Wren into protective custody on site. She had also left the green suitcase in Imogen Hartwell's spare bedroom. She had not realized she still had it. She had found it in the trunk of her car after Imogen made her unload everything that first night. It was the small green suitcase her mother had packed in 2014. Wren had been carrying it in the back of her trunk for 11 years without ever opening it. She had opened it for the first time the night before she drove back to Bramble Hollow. Inside, beneath a folded blue cardigan, had been her mother's journal. The one Delia had been keeping in the 11 years she was on the run. The one she had been bringing to Iris. Wren had read it in one night. She had not slept. She knew now what was inside the walnut frame. She pulled up the gravel driveway at 3 in the afternoon. The sky was the color of slate. The orchard was the color of brass. The farmhouse looked exactly as she had left it. She got out of the car. She walked up the porch steps. She unlocked the front door. The house felt different. She could not have said how at first. Then she saw it. The coat closet in the front hall, which she had closed before she left, was open. The grandfather clock had stopped. She had wound it the day she arrived. It had been working when she went to bed 3 nights ago. It was not working now. The pendulum hung still. Someone had been in the house. She did not show that she had noticed. She set down her duffel by the door. She took off her hoodie. She hung it on the hook in the hall. She walked into the kitchen and put on the kettle the way a tired girl coming home would put on a kettle. She made herself a cup of tea. She carried it upstairs. She walked into her grandmother's bedroom. The carved walnut frame was sitting on the dresser exactly where she had left it. She picked it up. She walked downstairs with it. She set it on the kitchen table. She sat down across from it. She waited. Garrett Holloway came up the porch steps at 4:07. She heard his boots on the wood. She heard the small hesitation before he knocked. He had a key. He had always had a key, but he had begun knocking after Iris died because he was no longer family. He had been performing that distinction for 3 weeks. Wren now understood that performance. She called out, "Come in, Garrett." The door opened. He came down the hall. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked exactly as he had looked the first night she met him. The brown cardigan, the flannel shirt, the corduroy trousers, the same kind exhausted eyes that had looked at her across the trunk in the shed.
"Sweetheart," he said, "I was worried sick. You did not say you were going anywhere. I drove by twice yesterday. Where on earth have you been?"
Wren looked at him for a long moment. She gestured to the chair across from her. Garrett sat down slowly. He had read something in her face. She could see it landing slow but unmistakable, the way a man feels a change in the weather before he hears the thunder. "I went to Philadelphia," she said. Garrett said nothing.
"I sat at a table with a federal agent named Marjorie Renshaw," Wren said. "I gave her the cassette tape. I gave her the affidavit. I gave her the autopsy diagram from Pearl Whitford. I gave her my father's journal. They are authenticating all of it right now. They will have warrants by the end of next week, not just for Ellsworth Thatcher, for Sutton, for Pritchard, for the sheriff of this county, for the editor of the Sentinel who killed my father's story, for everyone whose name is in those folders downstairs."
Garrett's eyes closed.
"And for you,"
Wren said. He did not open his eyes. "My grandmother knew," she said. "She has known since 2007. His shoulders sagged. He put his hands flat on the kitchen table. They were the long, thin hands of a tall, thin man. The hands of a man who had once been a deputy sheriff in this town in 2003. The hands of a man who had taken money in cash from Ellsworth Thatcher's people to follow her father and to report what her father was doing and to whom her father was speaking. The hands of a man who had not he would tell her in a moment known they were going to kill him.
"Wren," he said.
"Do not," she said. "I do not want it. I do not want your apology. I do not want your reason. I do not want to hear you tell me you did not know what they were going to do. I have read my grandmother's letter. I have read my father's journal. I have read my mother's journal too, which you did not know existed."
"And which she kept in a green suitcase in the trunk of her car. The whole 11 years she was running from you, Garrett. She thought she was running from Ellsworth Thatcher, but she was also running from you, because every time she let her guard down and called my grandmother, you were the one Iris had to keep it from. Do you understand? My mother died because she did not know to mistrust the man who had been her father's friend."
Garrett opened his eyes. He was crying silently in the way old men cry when they have been holding the tears for 50 years.
"I have loved you since the day you were born," he said. "I held you when you were 2 days old." "I do not care," Wren said. "You do not get to use that."
He looked down at his hands. "Iris told me in the letter," Wren said, "not to give you a single tear, so I will not. You can go now. You can sit on your porch and wait for the agents. They will come for you in the morning. Or you can do the thing you should have done in 2003 and call them yourself." Garrett stood up very slowly. He was an old man. He looked older now than he had looked an hour ago.
I will call them tonight,
he said. Good, Wren said. He stood there for a moment as if there were one more thing he wanted to say. There were many things. None of them were things she would let into the room. He turned. He walked back down the hall. He let himself out the front door. She heard his truck start in the gravel drive. She heard it pull away. She sat at the table. She had thought she would feel something then. Triumph, closure, anger, anything. She felt nothing. She felt the way she had felt at 11 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of her mother's car in the ditch outside that town she had never learned the name of, watching the snow begin to fall on the cracked windshield. She had not yet picked up the frame. She was going to pick it up. She was going to pick it up in a minute. Then she heard the second truck. It did not pull into the drive. It pulled into the orchard. She heard the soft crush of tires through grass, the careful approach of a vehicle that did not want to announce itself. She heard a door open. She heard a door close. Then she heard nothing. She stood up. She walked to the kitchen window. A man was walking across the backyard. He was perhaps 50, dressed in a dark wool coat and pressed dark trousers with a face she had seen in photographs Imogen Hartwell had shown her in Philadelphia. The face of a man who had just announced his candidacy for governor of Pennsylvania. Sutton Thatcher. He was not carrying anything. He looked from the window like a man who was paying a social call. Wren felt the wire taped against her sternum. She felt it the way a person feels the only thing in the world keeping them tethered to the world. The recording device was on. The black SUV was 3 miles down the highway. She had been told to stall. She had been told to keep him talking until they could close the distance. She walked back to the kitchen table. She picked up the walnut frame. She held it against her chest. Sutton Thatcher knocked on the back door. She opened it. He smiled. He had a politician's smile. It did not touch his eyes. His eyes had the same flat, polished quality she had seen at the campaign rally a week before.
Miss Calloway,
he said.
May I come in? It is cold out here.
Come in, she said. He stepped inside. He looked around the kitchen. He took off his leather gloves and laid them on the table. What a lovely old house, he said. I have admired it from the road for years.
You can stop, Wren said. You did not come here to admire the house.
His smile flickered.
It came back. You are right, he said. I did not. I came because there has been a misunderstanding, Miss Calloway. A misunderstanding that I would like to clear up before it goes any further. May I sit?
Please. He sat. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at her with the patient attention of a man who had practiced this kind of conversation in front of a mirror. "My family," he said, "has been a part of this community for 4 generations. My grandfather served this state for 30 years. He was a good man. He has been a good man his whole life. There are people, Miss Calloway, who would like to take that away from him in the last years of his life. There are people who would like to invent things, who would like to dredge up old stories that have no basis in fact and use them to destroy a man who has done nothing but good for this commonwealth. I am here because I am told that you have been speaking with some of those people. I would like to ask you not to." He paused. He waited. She did not say anything. She held the frame against her chest.
"I understand," Sutton said, "that you have recently come into possession of this property. I understand that you are a young woman who has had a difficult life. I would like to help you, Miss Calloway. My family would like to help you. There is a foundation that my grandfather established many years ago that provides educational scholarships to young people from this area. The annual award is $50,000. It is renewable for 4 years. We have an opening this year. I would like you to have it. I would like you to take it and go to college and build the life that you deserve."
He smiled again. "In exchange," he said, "we would like to acquire this property from you. At market value, the transaction would be entirely confidential. You would never have to return to this town. You would never have to think about it again. You could begin fresh." Wren looked at him. "How much?" she said. "I beg your pardon. How much for the property?" "Our offer," Sutton said carefully, "would be in the neighborhood of $900,000. $900,000, she repeated. "For a property the assessor values at $140," he said. "We are very motivated." "I see that," she said. She did not move. She kept the frame against her chest. "Mr. Thatcher," she said, "I would like you to tell me something." "Of course. Did you order the truck that hit my mother's car in 2014? She watched his face. There was a moment very small of something else passing through it. Then the politician's mask came back down smooth and practiced. "I do not know what you are talking about, Miss Calloway." "Did you?" she said. "I have never," he said, "ordered anything done to anyone. I would not know how. I am a candidate for public office. I am an attorney. I am a father of 2 children. The suggestion is offensive. Did your grandfather order it?" His jaw tightened. "My grandfather," he said quietly, "is 82 years old. He has not made an operational decision about anything in 15 years. Whatever you think you know, Miss Calloway, you do not know it. You have been talked into a story by people who hate my family for political reasons. I am offering you in good faith
a way out of that story. I am offering you a future. I would advise you very strongly to take it. His hands had gone flat on the table. And if I do not, she said.
He looked at her for a long moment.
Then,
he said, I am afraid I do not know what will happen to you. I do not know what will happen to this property. I do not know what will happen to a young woman with no family who has been living out of a car for 2 years and who has now begun making accusations she cannot prove against people who can defend themselves. You came here yourself, she said. You did not send anyone. You came in person.
I am offering you a great deal of money, Miss Calloway. I would not send a subordinate for that. You came in person, she said, because you wanted to look at me, because you wanted to know who I was, because you have spent 23 years wondering whether Beckett Calloway's daughter would ever come back, and now I am here, and you wanted to see me with your own eyes before you decided what to do with me.
Sutton Thatcher said nothing. He looked at her. She held his gaze. She thought of her mother in the driver's seat. She thought of her father on the iron bridge. She thought of her grandmother sitting alone at this kitchen table for 23 years. My grandmother, she said quietly, spent half her life looking for the one piece of evidence that would finish you. She thought it was in a safe deposit box. It was not. The safe deposit box was a decoy, Mr. Thatcher. There was something in it, but it was not the thing. The thing was somewhere else. The thing has been somewhere else for 23 years. My mother hid it the night my father died. She hid it in the only place she knew you would never look, and then she gave it to me, and she made me carry it from the day she put me in her arms. She took the frame away from her chest. She held it out so he could see it. His eyes moved to it. They stayed there.
This frame, Wren said, was carved by hand by my grandfather in 1970. My mother slid something into the backing of this frame the night my father was killed. I did not know about it. I have not known about it for 23 years. I read about it for the first time 3 nights ago in my mother's journal, which she kept in a green suitcase in the trunk of her car. The suitcase has been in the trunk of my car since the night she died. I have never opened it. I opened it 3 nights ago. I read what she had written. I now know what is in the back of this frame. She set the frame on the table between them. There is a microfilm cartridge taped behind the photograph, she said. The microfilm holds 11 pages of financial records. Calderwood Chemical to E. Thatcher personal account. Dates from 1989 to 2001. My father photographed them at his desk on the morning of February 11th, 2003. He gave the cartridge to my mother that afternoon. He told her, if anything happens to me, put it somewhere they will never look. So she put it behind a photograph of herself and a 3-month-old baby. She thought of it as the safest place in the world. Then she put me in the car
and she ran for 11 years. Sutton Thatcher did not move.
I am told, Wren said, that those 11 pages combined with the affidavit and the cassette tape and the autopsy diagram are sufficient. Federal warrants will be issued within the week. They will be issued against your grandfather. They will be issued against you for what your office did to my mother in 2014. They will be issued against 4 other men in this county and a former state attorney general and an editor in Wilkes-Barre and 1 retired pathologist in Florida.
She watched his face. She watched the moment the politician's mask broke. The thing under the mask was not what she had expected. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was hatred, old and patient, the kind of hatred that had been waiting in him since before she was born. He stood up. He did not say anything. He reached into the inside pocket of his wool coat. She did not see the pistol until it was already in his hand. It was small and dark and steady. He did not point it at her, not exactly. He held it down by his side, the way a man holds something he has not yet decided what to do with.
Give me the frame, Miss Calloway.
No.
Give me the frame.
No. He took a step around the table. She did not move. She held the frame. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of the wire against her sternum. She thought of the SUV that should by now be no more than half a mile away. Sutton Thatcher took another step. The kitchen door at the back of the house opened. It opened quietly. It did not slam. It opened the way a door opens when someone behind it has been waiting for the right moment to come in. Marjorie Renshaw stepped through it with her service weapon raised in both hands and her badge hanging on a chain around her neck. Behind her came 2 more agents, then a third, then a fourth. The black SUV was no longer 3 miles away. It had been parked behind the henhouse for the last 40 minutes. "Federal agents," Marjorie said calmly. "Drop the weapon, Mr. Thatcher, right now." Sutton Thatcher did not drop the weapon. He looked at Wren. He looked at the frame. For a second, just 1 second, Wren thought he was going to do it anyway. Thought he was going to raise the pistol and pull the trigger before they could stop him. She saw the calculation move through his face. The end of his family, the end of his grandfather's name, the end of everything 4 generations of Thatchers had built, weighed against one 23-year-old girl in a hoodie holding a photograph of her mother. He lowered the pistol. He set it on the kitchen table. Marjorie's people moved in. They put him on the ground. They cuffed his hands behind his back. They read him his rights in a quiet, professional voice. He did not resist. He did not speak. Wren stood with the frame against her chest and watched. She watched them walk him out the kitchen door, into the orchard, into the back of the black SUV. Marjorie Renshaw came back inside. She put her weapon away.
She looked at Wren. "You did fine, honey," she said. "You did real fine."
Wren did not answer. She walked to the kitchen table. She sat down. She set the frame in front of her on the wood. She looked at the photograph of her mother in the orchard, holding her in the sunlight in 2002. She finally cried. 3 days later, Ellsworth Thatcher was arrested in his lake house in the Poconos. He was 82 years old. He had been having his morning coffee on the screened porch when the agents arrived. He did not resist. He did not speak. He was rolled out to the federal vehicle in his wheelchair in front of 3 news cameras that had already been tipped off in a blue cardigan and house slippers, looking in the photographs that ran the next day in every paper from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, like an exhausted old man who had been waiting for a long time to stop running. Sutton Thatcher's gubernatorial campaign suspended operations that afternoon. Vance Pritchard was arrested at his office behind the Methodist Church. He gave a full statement within 36 hours in exchange for a sentencing recommendation. He named names. The sheriff of Bramble Hollow County, a son-in-law of Ellsworth Thatcher, resigned the next morning and was indicted by the end of the week. Calderwood Chemical, which had been acquired by a larger corporation in 2003, faced a federal class action suit on behalf of the residents of 3 counties. The initial filing sought $2.3 billion in damages. The editor of the Bramble Hollow Sentinel in 2003, who had killed Beckett Calloway's story after his death, and who was now living in a retirement community in Sarasota, was located and questioned. He died of a stroke 6 weeks later before he could be charged. Garrett Holloway turned himself in on the morning after Wren confronted him. He pled guilty to conspiracy after the fact. He died of a heart attack in a holding cell at the federal courthouse in Scranton 3 weeks before his sentencing. He left behind a sealed letter for Wren. She did not open it. Pearl Whitford, the nurse who had kept the photocopy in her attic for 23 years, retired in March. She came to the funeral. She held Wren's hand the whole way through. The funeral was held in the orchard on a clear day in April. Iris Calloway had been cremated 3 months before. Her ashes had been in a small jar on the mantel of the front parlor. Wren had not been ready to put them anywhere. She put them now on that April day at the base of the apple tree at the end of the second row, the tree her mother had read in as a child. She also buried beside the jar 2 other things. The first was a copy of Beckett Calloway's last article, the one about Calderwood, which Wren and Imogen Hartwell had finished, and which had run on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer the previous Sunday. The second was a printed copy of an obituary that the Bramble Hollow Sentinel had refused to print in 2003, and which now, 23 years later, would run on the front page of the relaunched paper. Beckett Calloway, Marine, journalist, husband, father. Wren had relaunched the paper herself. She had used a portion of the federal whistleblower settlement her grandmother's estate received under the law passed after her father's death. She had hired 3 reporters and 1 editor and a fact-checker. The first edition had run on a Tuesday in March. The paper was small. The paper would always be small. The paper was hers. She lived in the farmhouse now. She slept in her grandmother's bed under the rose-colored quilt. She had bought new sheets. She had refinished the floor of the front parlor. She had not changed the photograph of her father in his Marine Corps uniform. She had hung beside it a photograph of her mother and herself in the orchard in 2002, and beside that, a photograph of her grandmother and grandfather, the only one she had taken at their wedding in 1965. She had also hung in the kitchen the carved walnut frame. The photograph behind the glass was the same one her mother had put there. The microfilm was no longer behind it. The microfilm was in a federal evidence locker. It would eventually be returned to her. She still kept the frame within reach. She still sometimes ran her finger along the edge of the carved flowers her grandfather had cut into the wood in 1970. On a warm evening in late May, she walked out to the iron bridge over Drumheller Creek for the first time. She had been putting it off. She walked the last half mile on foot. The creek was high with snowmelt. The bridge had been repaired and repainted twice since 1975. There was a small granite marker now at the south end of the bridge paid for by the township after the indictments. 3 lines were cut into the stone. Beckett Calloway, 1964 to 2003. He told the truth. She stood at the marker for a long time. The sun was setting through the trees. The water moved beneath her. She thought of the night she had opened the red shed. She thought of the night she had stood in the parking lot in Harrisburg with the envelope from Sheridan Boggs in her hand. She thought of the 19 months she had slept in the back seat of the Honda. She thought of the 11 years she had moved with her mother from town to town. She thought of the way her grandmother had written "You were never alone." I promise. I promise. She had not believed it at the time. She believed it now. The Honda was still in the driveway at the farmhouse. She had not been able to bring herself to sell it. She had not been able to bring herself to drive it either. It sat parked behind the kitchen, its tires flat, its windshield dusty, the slow weeds beginning to come up around it. She did not need it anymore. She did not need to keep it in case she had to leave. She walked back to the farmhouse in the long blue dusk. The house was lit. She had left a lamp on in the kitchen. She had left the porch light on, too. The light spilled out across the gravel drive and lit the lower branches of the closest apple tree. The orchard breathed around her. She walked up the porch steps in her boots, the way her father must have walked up these steps 1,000 times, the way her mother must have walked up these steps every day of the first 28 years of her life. She opened the front door. She stepped inside. She closed it behind her. She locked it out of old habit, then unlocked it again, because she had begun in the last few weeks to leave it unlocked at night. She put on the kettle. She made a cup of tea. She carried it into the parlor and sat down in her grandmother's leather chair beside the cold hearth. She would build a fire in a minute. She would build a fire and she would sit and she would read the book that was still face down on the side table from the night before, the one her grandmother had been reading the week she died. She would read it slowly. She had time. For the first time in 23 years, Wren Calloway had time. Outside in the orchard, the wind moved softly through the apple trees. A barn owl called once from the woods beyond the creek. The granite marker by the bridge stood in the dark. The red shed at the edge of the orchard stood with its door open to the night the way Wren now left it, because there was no longer anything inside that needed to be hidden. She sipped her tea. She closed her eyes. She was home.